An event that in Israel was called a betrayal on Donald Trump's part, the administration of US President Donald Trump decided to exclude Israel from negotiations with Iran. Because, according to the American president, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is torn by internal contradictions, and he is not capable of making rational decisions. On the other hand, the White House has already hinted that the reason for excluding Israel from the negotiations was the overly optimistic assessments of Prime Minister Netanyahu, which never came true in this war. And that's why all the hate for the failures of this war is directed at Donald Trump himself, which of course he takes very personally, saying he trusted Netanyahu, but the goals of the war were never achieved. At the same time, Trump himself unexpectedly announces that in the coming hours he will most likely declare the resumption of war against Iran, since the negotiations have reached a complete deadlock. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. I would be grateful to you for that because it really helps promote the content on YouTube. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, today the New York Times, citing its sources, reports that the administration of US President Donald Trump has decided to exclude Israel from negotiations with Iran. The reason for this was the overly optimistic assessments of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which never came true. It is reported that on the eve of the attack on Iran on February 28, Netanyahu was not only present in the White House Situation Room together with Donald Trump, but even led the discussions in which he predicted that a joint strike by the US and Israel could very well lead to the fall of the Islamic Republic of Iran. By the way, this has been written about a lot, that it was supposedly Benjamin Netanyahu's optimism that made Donald Trump start this war, because the American president truly believed in a very quick victory over Iran. That supposedly, if they strike really hard together, Iran will collapse, the regime will fall, the nuclear program will definitely be shut down, and in general, the Islamic Republic will be left in ruins. However, as the New York Times writes, a few weeks later, after Netanyahu's optimistic assurances turned out to be wrong, the situation changed dramatically. It became clear that there would be no quick victory and oil prices skyrocketed. Trump's team did not expect the Strait of Hormuz to be blocked at all, nor did they expect Iran to start attacking neighboring countries in the Persian Gulf. And all of Trump's attempts to intimidate Iran just ended up in embarrassment. All his deadlines, all his warnings and so on, they've been dragging on for weeks now, and I think the whole world is quietly chuckling at these statements. As a result, according to two officials from Israel's Ministry of Defense, the Trump administration sidelined Israel so much that the country's leaders were almost completely excluded from the ceasefire negotiations between the US and Iran. Now the Israelis, lacking information from their closest ally, are forced to gather information about what is happening between the US and Iran on their own, through their connections with leaders and diplomats in the region, as well as with the help of their own surveillance inside the Iranian regime. And this is exactly what is behind Netanyahu's grim mood. The day before, Trump, who held an emergency meeting with his team about the resumption of the war, said the following, quote, "I think one of two things will happen. Either I will strike them harder than ever before, or we will sign a favorable agreement. Some would prefer to make a deal, while others want to resume the war. But I want to reject the suggestion that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is concerned about the possibility of an unfavorable deal." And here comes the most interesting part. Trump publicly called Netanyahu, quote, "torn by contradictions." Israeli officials state that the Prime Minister is extremely concerned about the deal being discussed and has urged Trump to start a new round of strikes, which basically Trump is moving toward again, but Trump is already openly saying, listen, he is torn by contradictions and cannot make sound decisions. Nevertheless, the shift from the format where Netanyahu is in the White House Situation Room and coordinates strikes together with American President Trump to the format where he has been sidelined. His exclusion from the negotiations could have serious consequences for Israel and especially for Netanyahu, who faces a tough re-election battle this year because there will be elections in Israel. And here it is important to note that, as the New York Times writes, Netanyahu has long positioned himself to voters as Donald Trump's mentor, someone able to secure the support of the US president and, importantly, keep it. In a televised address at the beginning of the war, he presented himself as equal to the US president, assuring Israelis that he spoke with Trump almost every day, exchanging ideas and advice and making decisions together. Netanyahu showed that he was almost dictating to Donald Trump how to conduct this war against Iran, and hinted that Trump was listening because he believed that Bibi definitely understood better what was happening in the region. Next, I'll give you a controversial quote from the New York Times, and you can draw your own conclusions. In February, Netanyahu dragged Israel into a war, fueling grand plans to achieve a goal he had pursued for decades: to stop Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons once and for all. When the war began with the defeat of Iran's leadership, it seemed that another goal might also be achieved: the overthrow of the Iranian regime. However, many in Trump's inner circle had always considered this idea absurd. Soon the priorities of the country of war and Israel began to diverge more and more, especially after Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, which led to a sharp rise in oil prices and forced Donald Trump to agree to a ceasefire. Israel, on the other hand, faced the fact that its main goals remained completely unattainable. In particular, at the beginning of the war, Netanyahu wanted regime change, destruction of the Iranian nuclear program, and elimination of Iran's missile program. None of these goals were achieved. And now, considering Israel's exclusion from the negotiations, the issue of the ballistic missile arsenal may have been left completely off the agenda. At the very least, the US doesn't raise this issue at the negotiations at all. Thus, any deal with Iran will not improve on the 2015 agreement at all, which Netanyahu criticized because it didn't address Iranian missiles. Netanyahu said Obama signed some nonsense, it's a terrible agreement, it gives Iran a free hand, and so on. And now it turns out that the whole war was for nothing, because the missile program remains. Nothing is clear yet about the nuclear program, and the regime in Iran has become even more hardened. In addition, Israel now has other concerns about the possible outlines of an agreement between the US and Iran, including the lifting of sanctions against Tehran. And this could lead to Israel actually losing more from this war than it gains. And finally, let me remind you that this week the US was already supposed to resume attacks on Iran, but Donald Trump announced a suspension of strikes, citing an alleged request from allies in the Persian Gulf. All of this happened against the backdrop of ongoing negotiations. At the same time, Netanyahu believes that it won't be possible to achieve results through negotiations, especially considering Iran's refusal to give up enriched uranium. He is convinced that any delay in strikes only benefits Tehran, and against this backdrop, Netanyahu insisted on resuming hostilities. And I think that the next few hours, maybe days, will show whose point of view ultimately prevailed. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would be grateful. You can do this by donating through any of the links and details in the description of this video. There are a variety of options there. Choose whichever option suits you best, or scan the QR code on your screen. That's the easiest way to support this channel. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.